Good morning, Michael.
Morning, Michael.
Thank you. We've got Michael Squared here today. Thanks everyone for tuning in this morning. Really looking forward to this conversation. My name is Michael Macalino. I'm the Agri-Food Technology Lead at BDO. So really excited to have this chat with Michael Fox today. He's been doing some interesting stuff in the alternative proteins, and we're going to basically learn a little bit more about his journey from Shoes of Prey to now Fable Foods. For those that don't know Michael, Michael Fox is the co-founder and CEO of Fable Food Co, which is an alternative protein startup, reimagining how we consume shiitake mushrooms. Fable is backed by celebrity Heston Blumenthal and also tech billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes. And Fable was a result of Michael's desire to create a solution which combines his cravings for meat with his healthy home-cooked habits to create a whole food plant-based meat. Today, we're basically going to have a chat about Michael's experience as an entrepreneur, how he got to Fable. We're also going to cover some of the macro trends in the alternative protein world, and then learn a bit more about the Fable story and the future for Fable. So really looking forward to the conversation, and good to have a chat this morning with you, Michael.
Yeah, same, Michael. No, thanks for having me.
And also for everyone on the line this morning, we're going to try and make sure we've got some time for Q&A later on. So please, we've got a bit more of a sort of interactive session today. It's more of a meeting kind of format than the webinar format. So highly encourage questions and we're going to make sure those available. So what I want to start with is I'm really sort of keen to understand the journey from Shoes of Prey, and you know, for those that don't know Shoes of Prey, maybe give a bit of background on Shoes of Prey. But you know, women's shoes to alternative proteins is a pretty different type of journey. So keen to sort of, I suppose, touch on that entrepreneurial journey, and to start off with, just get an understanding of what Shoes of Prey was, and sort of what that journey was like for you over, I think, almost a 10-year period.
Yeah, so yeah, the concept behind Shoes of Prey, for those who don't know it, is you could design your own women's shoes online. So you could go on our website, change the kind of shape and structure of the shoes, different leathers and materials, design them up, sort of women's fashion shoes like high heels, ballet flats, ankle boots, and then we would make them and deliver them to you. So three of us started that business back in late 2008. We launched. And yeah, it ended up being sort of a 10-year journey. First 2 years, we kind of did really well in this niche of women who were very passionate about designing their own shoes. We sort of didn't raise any external capital, grew out of our own cash flow. But we had probably about 10,000 women a day coming to our website, designing shoes and not purchasing. We had really low conversion rates. And so we did a bunch of consumer research around what these customers were doing. And what we realized was we were doing really well in this niche of creative women who were passionate about designing their own shoes, but we had all these mainstream mass market customers coming to our website and designing shoes but not purchasing. So we asked them, why are you not buying? And basically they told us three things. They said, firstly, we want a simplified shoe design experience. We'd sort of developed it to be very kind of free form for that creative customer. Secondly, they wanted a shorter delivery time. So it was about 5 weeks. They wanted it to be under 2 weeks because the mainstream customer was often designing shoes for a particular event. And then thirdly, they didn't want to pay a premium for designing their own shoes. We were charging a roughly sort of 30% premium. So we looked at those three things and we realized, realized we could actually deliver that value proposition. We could make those changes to the product offering. But to do that, we would need to go and raise external capital because we were going to need to build our own shoe factory in China to bring the lead times down and the unit costs down. And we're going to have to hire more user experience people and software engineers to simplify the shoe design experience. So we went out and raised some capital. Over the next kind of 5 years, we ended up raising 4 rounds of capital, sort of seed rounds, Series A and a Series B. Ended up raising all up about 35 million Australian dollars. And over that period, the business grew nicely. We went out and executed on that, building the shoe factory in China, hired the software engineers, simplified the shoe design experience. And over that next sort of 5-year period, we implemented everything that the mass market customer had wanted. And our revenue grew. Like, we'd been at about a 2 million annual revenue run rate when we'd first raised capital. We grew to sort of a 10 million revenue run rate over those 5 years. But we should have been, if the value proposition was resonating properly, we should have been at like 100 million in revenue, and we needed to be at sort of 25 to 30 million in revenue to be covering all of these fixed costs that we now had in the business with the factory and the software engineers. So we realized that the value proposition just wasn't resonating properly with that mass market customer. And now we built it, we could actually see how consumers were behaving on our website. And yeah, we could see that consciously that mass market consumer thinks she wants to customize. She loves the idea of designing her own shoes, but deep down, subconsciously, she doesn't really have the confidence to do it. And she really just wants to see what's popular on Instagram and in fashion magazines and buy not only that design, but even buy that brand. And so we just failed to cross the chasm from that creative customer into the mass market. You know, we tried a few different things to sort of pivot the business into some other segments and other niches, but we couldn't get any of those to get traction. And then ultimately we ended up basically closing the business down and selling the assets. So yeah, it was kind of a pretty wild sort of startup roller coaster ride journey from raising $35 million, not being able to return that to investors. You know, at our peak, we had about 200 people because we built the shoe factory in China, and we moved our headquarters from Sydney to Los Angeles, and had a team of about 30 in Los Angeles. So we had to lay all that team off. So yeah, pretty kind of wild ups and downs, startup roller coaster. To answer the second part of your question about the journey from there into Fable, so I'd gone vegetarian about 5 years ago now, so kind of during the Shoes of Prey journey. So for me, it was just a personal decision, kind of a mix of ethical, environmental, and health reasons in that order. And when I finished up Shoes of Prey about 2.5 years ago. Took 6 months off. Kind of needed a break after the last few years of Shoes of Prey were fairly tough. So took a break. My wife's Danish, so we went over to Denmark for 6 months. Our second child was born over there, so a lot of time just being a dad and a lot of time off. But also spent some time just reading about areas that intellectually interested me. And being vegetarian, one of the things I ended up finding myself reading more about was industrial animal agriculture, and just got very passionate about wanting to help contribute to ending that. For a whole bunch of reasons we can chat about if you'd like to.
Yeah, definitely.
And so figured I'd been vegetarian for 5 years. I tried being one of those annoying vegetarians that tries to convince everyone around me to turn vegetarian. And I think in 5 years, I've convinced like 2 people. I caught up with one of them the other day. He's not even vegetarian anymore. So I'm a pretty terrible activist, but figured maybe I could take some of my entrepreneurial learnings from Shoes of Prey and start a meat alternative company to help people reduce their meat consumption that way. Like, in talking to a lot of people around me, people do understand the issues around meat consumption, and they do want to reduce. There's a lot of people who do want to reduce their meat consumption, but it's hard. Like, they find it hard because meat is delicious. So if you can deliver someone the taste and texture and that delicious experience of meat, do it at a reasonable price, but make it out of something other than animals. Figured that's the best path to helping end industrial animal agriculture. So that's what set me down the path of Fable.
Very good. No, and I think we'll probably throughout this conversation cover back on a few of those points, because there's a couple of things which I think resonate with both the general startup community and sort of how that's evolving, but also in the work that I do with ag tech. I think the way that you're starting to go about building Fable is fascinating. And sort of want to learn a little bit more about the way you've gone about with Shoes of Prey, building your own manufacturing facilities and going that very sort of capital intensive road, whereas with Fable, you seem to be doing a lot more sort of outsourced manufacturing. And that's something where I want to sort of dive in a little bit deeper as we sort of progress in the conversation a bit more. What I'm really sort of keen to get an understanding of is when you built Shoes, capital still Australia. And you were probably one of the first companies to actually go from Australia to the US. I mean, that would have been sort of early 2012 or something like that you went over. What was the startup ecosystem like when you were building Shoes of Prey? What were some of the challenges you need to overcome to raise fairly substantial amounts of capital and sort of launch into the US?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, kind of we launched Shoes of Prey late 2008, and so yeah, we're based in Sydney from 2000 late 2008 through to kind of 2012 when we went to actually might have even been 2013 when we went to LA. Yeah, the startup scene in Australia was it's changed dramatically since then. So back then, the kind of VC community had gone through the .com boom and .com bust and hadn't really recovered from that. So there were a few venture capital firms around, but they were kind of on their last legs. So there was Southern Cross Venture Partners and Starfish Ventures were kind of the two main VCs, which no longer exist. And they were kind of on the last bits of money, capital from their last funds and weren't sort of able to raise new funds. So there wasn't really and there was certainly no startup accelerators. There was really no kind of startup events or culture, or very, very few. So when we started Shoes of Prey, we weren't even thinking about ourselves as a tech company. Like there wasn't even that. I think we read a little bit of TechCrunch out of the US, which was kind of the main sort of piece of media out of the US at the time. So we had a little bit of a sense of what was going on there. And one of my co-founders and I both had worked at Google, so we had a bit of a sense of the tech space from that. But we weren't even really thinking about ourselves as being a tech startup, and because that community and sort of identity didn't really exist in Australia.
Yep.
The first 2 years we hadn't even considered raising venture capital because we pretty much didn't even know what that was, because again, there weren't kind of events and a culture around that. So it was only kind of a couple of years in, we started to learn about venture capital and started to see how it worked and realized, maybe this, and we had all these mass market customers coming to the site. We realized, maybe this is a business that can scale like these tech startups seem to be doing. And so then raising the first round of funding that we raised was hard. It took a year because we had to kind of cobble together a whole bunch of different investors. So we ended up, that first round was Southern Cross Venture Partners, which Bill Barty, who was one of the co-founders of Blackbird Ventures, he was involved in that. Mike Cannon-Brookes ended up investing personally. Who else? Rick Baker from Blackbird Ventures, he was at MLC, one of the big super funds. MLC invested. So I think actually Bill, Rick and Nikki met around that time, sort of as we were raising that round. So it was all pre-Blackbird, but those people were kind of all involved. And then a whole bunch of other kind of angel investors. So it was difficult to raise that round because there just wasn't really a venture capital scene. But it's been amazing watching that change. I mean, even in the 5 years before we went to LA, that obviously changed dramatically. Blackbird then formed about a year after our first round of funding, and then led our second round of funding. Obviously the space now is just incredible, worlds apart from where it was, which is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, even just in the 3 years, I mean, I was trying to do a Series A back in 2017. And that was an absolute nightmare. And I look at the ecosystem now in sort of 3 or 4 years, and it's just incredible what's bloomed. And you've got accelerators and VC firms popping up. You see new funds that I've seen right me away. I didn't think in the pandemic back in March, everyone thought that VC and investment was going to disappear. So it's an incredible landscape now, particularly in the sort of agri-food space. And have you found coming into the sort of the food space with venture capital that it's a fertile ground, or what's the investment discussions been compared to when you were raising a few years ago?
Yeah, so I guess I've only been in the agri-food space for 2 years, but from what I saw just sort of prior to that, like there wasn't really, venture capital firms weren't really looking at that space at all as an area where there was going to be a lot of innovation. So I think that's changed dramatically over the last 2 years, and probably off the back of, like Beyond Meat, its IPO in the US, which has gone really well. So that's kind of sparked a lot more interest, and that was sort of a little over 12 months ago now. I think that sort of sparked a lot more interest, and it's that sort of agri-tech space has become very mainstream now in the tech and VC space, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of innovation to happen in that category. So it's fertile ground for investors and startups.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing some research and sort of want to get your thoughts on some of these macro trends. But this year alone, there's been $1.1 billion has gone into alternative foods, alternative proteins. 500 million of that was Impossible Burger or Impossible Foods raising their fund, but still, that's $500 million that's gone into this space this year. What do you see as I suppose, why now? Like, what do you see as the enabling technologies that have sort of come about now that weren't around 5 years ago? Why is it that it's almost like 2 years ago this space didn't exist and now it's just this?
Yes. Sorry, I'm not sure if that's you or me cutting out, Michael. Apologies.
Sorry, Michael, quick production note. You just cut out there. Could you repeat?
All good. So what I was just asking is that, over the past couple of years, we've seen all of these new alternative protein solutions and products come to market. Do you think that that's a market that's started to create itself, or do you think that there's been some enabling technologies that have sort of reached a level of commercial maturity to allow the alternative protein sector to really explode?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple of different factors. So I think it's our society is coming to the realization that industrial animal agriculture is it doesn't make sense on a whole range of ethical, environmental, and health and even pandemic-inducing levels. So I think movies, for example, like. That understanding is becoming more mainstream. So documentaries like Game Changers have kind of shown a much bigger group of society the health issues around eating too much meat. The David Attenborough documentary that's out on Netflix at the moment, that's showing people the sustainability issues around industrial animal agriculture. The current most pandemics that have happened throughout history have evolved in industrial animal agricultural settings. So swine flu was pig factory farms, bird flu was chicken factory farms, and there's investigations still going on around COVID, but the initial take is that it came out of sort of wet food markets and a whole bunch of bats in a small space, and the virus evolved in there. So I think that all of these sort of things are society's coming to the realization that industrial animal agriculture isn't sustainable and has to change. So there's that piece. The second piece is that the meat industry is massive. It's one of the largest industries in the world. It's a $2 trillion industry, and it's 2.5% of global GDP. So there's not too many industries in the world that are 2.5% of global GDP, obviously. And the view that's forming is that that has to change for environmental, health, and ethical reasons, and that it will change and be disrupted over the next 15 to 20 years, because the reason people buy food is the predominant two reasons are taste, texture, and price. And so if you can produce a product that has a better taste and texture than meat from animals at a price that's cheaper than meat from animals, and make it from plants, or in our case, mushrooms, then you can disrupt the meat industry, and people will switch over to buying those products instead of animal meat. And then to your point, the technologies are available now to do that, and it's very clear that that's going to happen. Better taste and texture and lower price is going to happen over the next 15 to 20 years. And as that happens, the whole meat industry is going to shift away from using animals to using plants, mushrooms, or maybe cultured meat. And it's the same shift that's happening in power generation. So solar and wind power is now cheaper to produce. It produces electricity that's just as good as electricity from coal, and it's cheaper than producing from coal. So in Australia, we haven't built a new coal power plant for more than a decade in Australia, just because the economics don't stack up anymore. And in 10, 15 years time, most of Australia's power is going to be generated from wind and solar. And so the same thing's going to happen in the meat industry. So the venture capital community can see that that's going to happen. It's a massive industry about to be disrupted. So that's why there's so much investment and interest in the space.
Do you think that there's been a particular technology, and I mean, I was noting that overnight there was the announcement in Singapore that they've regulated the first cellular meat, a chicken that has been approved to basically go into market. Do you see that, I suppose there's going to be almost like new categories of food or new categories? I know that the categorization and bringing completely new foods together is something that George at Val Foods is very much pursuing. Do you see that, you know, these technologies that enable alternative proteins, whether it's plant-based or cellular-based, will, I suppose, create completely new ones that will create a new segment within themselves that's completely adjacent to traditional livestock, traditional meat?
Yeah, definitely. And so yeah, like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat have sort of been big pioneers in the space. Both those companies sort of started 7 or 8 years ago. So kind of they've really helped drive growth in this space. And the sort of technology that they've been using is an ingredient called textured vegetable protein. So you basically take soybeans or peas, strip out the fiber and the oils, so you're kind of left with a protein powder like you take at the gym. And then you add some liquid, high heat, high pressure, and put it through an extruder, and you end up with like a product that has kind of the texture of a minced beef. And then you can add a whole bunch of flavors and other ingredients into that and binders, and then you can end up with a burger patty or a minced beef. So that technology has been around for a few decades, but they've kind of pioneered bringing it into the meat alternative space and making it the taste and texture much better than it was previously. So that's kind of one angle, the textured vegetable protein angle. And most of the meat alternatives on the market today are based on textured vegetable protein. Another angle is fermenting mycelium. So taking different species of fungi and mushrooms. Mycelium is the kind of root system, essentially analogous to the root system of a plant. It's kind of normally sort of in the soil and underground, but you can ferment that in a sort of tank similar to how you ferment beer. And grow that mycelium, and you can end up with producing kind of minced beef type texture meat alternatives out of that. So the company Quorn, Q-U-O-R-N, it's actually been around for a few decades. They kind of pioneered that. Now there's a lot of mycelium companies coming onto the market. So that's another technology. As you touched on, Val Foods in Sydney are kind of the best of the kind of, or the most advanced, at least, of the cell-based meat companies in Australia. So Val are taking cells from a whole range of different animals and growing those, actually kind of growing them in sort of that sort of a nutrient broth, and then growing those cells. So basically making meat from animals, but just using a biopsy of an animal to do it, as opposed to having to kill the animal. And that's a space that there's still, well, as you touched on, yes, Singapore announced yesterday, it's kind of the first country to approve, they've approved a US company called Just. They've approved the sale of Just's cultured chicken. So that'll be the first time that there will be commercial sales of cell-based meat. Those cell-based meat products are still quite expensive, so they've got a few years of more sort of technological development that they need to do to bring the price down. But that's a really interesting technology where you are producing meat, but just in a more sustainable, ethical, and healthy way. And then the angle that we're taking, I guess it kind of stems a little bit from our sort of backgrounds as co-founders. For me personally, I'm a pretty healthy eater. Live on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, shop at my local farmers markets, do a lot of my own cooking, bake my own sourdough, brew my own kombucha, and eat a pretty minimally processed whole food diet. And so in wanting to develop a meat alternative, I wanted to develop something that fit with that diet. So, no artificial ingredients and whole food based. And so to achieve that, the angle we've taken is using agriculturally grown mushrooms as the base ingredient. So we take shiitake mushrooms, and my two co-founders, I obviously don't have a food background, as you've heard, but my two co-founders are Jim Fuller's grew up in Texas, fine dining chef for 12 years, who then went and studied chemistry and agricultural science and majored in mycology, which is mushroom science. And then Jim's worked as a mycologist for the last decade. So really unique skill set of mushroom scientist and chef in one person. And then Chris McLaughlin co-founded Australia's largest organic mushroom farm and was 2018 Australian Organic Farmer of the Year. So they've got the technical background in mushrooms. So we basically take agriculturally grown mushrooms and with some really sort of innovative cook steps and using all natural ingredients, we turn shiitake mushrooms into meat alternatives. So yeah, the kind of technologies that we're developing are sort of around agriculturally grown mushrooms and to create all natural whole food based meat alternatives. So that's kind of, 4 different approaches that different companies are taking in the space. And all of those kind of technologies are developing rapidly, aided by all the investment that's happening in the space because that's going to drive massive industry change over the next couple of decades.
Yeah, I think that was a really good synopsis of the different approaches that are available. I think people sort of sometimes see the sector as a bit of a monolith. It's just all alternative proteins. It's all the same. I've been trying to work my way through all of the different styles that there are, and
you just cut out again, Michael.
On the weekend. Are you there? Sorry. Just saying, as part of the research, I had a bit of Fable Foods on the weekend, which was delicious. So really enjoyed that. And I think definitely the best of the texture for the. Sorry, my computer's just decided to. There we go. Definitely the best from a texture perspective that I've tried. I'm interested to know. I suppose in developing the product, because you've been able to do this really quickly. I think, Fable Food's only been around for just over a year or so. So keen to get an understanding of what that process has been like to, essentially bring the team together, go through the process of developing the product. You've raised some capital so far, and you've also got obviously the manufacturing side of things up and running.
We've lost you.
Okay. All good? We're back?
All good.
So I'll hand it back over to Michael, but keen to, I suppose, understand how you've gone through that rapid product commercialization process, because it's probably one of the most, factors that I've seen that's so different to other companies in this space.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's definitely helped. Doing tech startup second time round is definitely we made pretty much every mistake in the book in Shoes of Prey, so kind of learnt a lot from that and applying all of that to Fable. So I suppose one of the big lessons for me out of Shoes of Prey was getting your market research right and really understanding the customer journey and what the customer's looking for, because that was ultimately the biggest mistake we made in Shoes of Prey. Was we just got our market research wrong. The mass market customer, all our market research said she wanted to design her own shoes, when actually in reality she didn't. She wanted quite the opposite, and we didn't uncover that in our research. And that was hindered by the fact she consciously thought she wanted to design her shoes, so that's what she told us. But it was a subconscious thing that she didn't want to. But we should have uncovered that in our research. So I've spent a lot more time talking to customers and understanding the space. One thing that's helped is I obviously didn't wear women's shoes. I'm a vegetarian. I eat meat alternatives. So I'm a consumer of meat alternatives. So and I've been vegetarian for 5 years and gone through that journey of transitioning to not eating meat. So it helps that I'm a consumer. Helps me understand the category. But I still don't want to rely on that because I'm only a sample of one. So I spent a lot of time early on just kind of creepily watching customers shop the meat alternative category in Woolworths and Coles, and seeing which products they picked up off the shelf, which they put back down on the shelf, which ones they picked up and put in their basket and purchased. I just watch their behavior and then go and talk to those customers afterwards to understand, why you picked this product up, why didn't you buy it? You did buy this one, what was the reasons for that? Which products have you tried? Which do you like? Which do you repeat purchase? So I spent hours and hours and hours doing that in supermarkets to kind of get a good sense myself of who the different customers were. And it was out of, it was my own journey of eating a really whole food, natural, healthy, minimally processed diet, coupled with seeing that it was probably about a third of the customers I spoke to in the supermarkets were looking at the ingredient list on the meat alternatives and wanting to understand what was in them, and we're trying to eat a really, really healthy diet. So that it was that kind of market research that led me down the path of wanting to use mushrooms as an ingredient. So yeah, I'd say one of the big things and in some ways it's counterintuitive. Like, it feels like spending time talking to customers and doing market research is, slows down actually going out and developing the product, but it's kind of slowing down to speed you up, because you then, when you go and what you should be developing, and you get it right earlier on. So that market research has been really helpful. Then doing the actual development of the product. So I started out, so I've been at it for 2 years now, almost 2 years. I kind of moved back to Australia at the end of December 2 years ago, and basically started working on Fable full time then. So I went and taught, I don't have a technical background in food. Like, I had a good sense of the product I wanted to create and the company I wanted to build, but didn't have the technical background. So went and talked to a lot of different people in the food industry, met a lot of chefs, food scientists, food manufacturers. That's kind of how I got put onto a few chefs put me onto the idea of using agriculturally grown mushrooms as a base ingredient. So then started actually looking globally at who did interesting things with mushrooms around the world, talked to more people, got a sense that shiitake mushrooms in our case could be a really good ingredient, and then started doing development work with a couple of different partners to sort of see what direction that would take me. Ended up getting on 2 years ago, Mars, the big food company, ran a food accelerator program. And so I've got a tech startup background, so I felt like I didn't necessarily need a tech accelerator program, but I don't have any food background. So I was like, okay, food accelerator program, that sounds perfect for plugging a giant skill set gap that I have in what I'm trying to do. So went on that Mars food accelerator program, and then through that and a few other people kind of introduced me to my 2 co-founders. So it's basically 5 different people said, okay, you want to do mushroom meat alternatives, you got to meet Jim and Chris, because they're kind of experts in this space and they've been thinking about doing something similar. So yeah, went and met Jim and Chris kind of middle of last year. We got on really well, realized we had very complementary skill sets, them with the technical background, me with the tech startup background. And we kind of, they plugged exactly the gap that I had, and vice versa. And so we teamed up to start the business. So I'd already done some development work. Jim was a perfect partner to help finish development of the product. He'd grown up. I was kind of developing a slow cooked alternative to slow cooked meats like pulled pork and braised beef. I sort of wanted to do a natural product, whole food based. But also I didn't want to do another burger patty or minced beef, because there's lots of those in the market. So I sort of identified a gap in those kind of slow cooked meats. Jim had grown up in Texas eating slow cooked meats his whole life, working as a fine dining chef, making a lot of those dishes in restaurants, and was a mushroom scientist. So it was couldn't have been a better background for helping finish development of that product. And so we finished developing. It was basically a year of consumer research and product development, and then launched in December last year.
Excellent. And I mean, how did you go about the actual manufacturing selection process? Because that's something that I've seen that's quite unique to the way you've gone about this. Do you see yourself and Fable as a food R&D and product development company, or a food manufacturer?
Yeah, so no, it's good. It's a good question. One we thought about and still think about a lot, actually. So for Shoes of Prey, the journey was for the first 2 years we outsourced our manufacturing, but when we realised there was this mass market customer opportunity, and we looked at what was needed or what our consumer research at least said was needed to satisfy that customer, meet the needs of that customer, we realised that there was actually no one in the world who produced custom shoes at scale and could make and deliver them globally within 2 weeks, and at the same price as mass market shoes. So there was no manufacturing partner we could work with. So that was something that we had to do and develop the manufacturing technologies to be able to deliver that. So we had experience in Shoes of Prey doing both things, outsourcing manufacturing and then insourcing it. And the reason we insourced it is because no one else could do it. So looking at Fable, and thinking about whether we manufacture ourselves or work with other people, there's plenty of really good food manufacturers out in the market. A core part of our value proposition is that our products are minimally processed and whole food based. So our manufacturing process, it's unique, but it's not difficult. Like we're not doing anything kind of crazy with the manufacturing, because that would go against our ethos of keeping the product as kind of whole food based as possible. So there are plenty of manufacturers out there who can do the manufacturing that we need. So in our case, it's like looking at the market. That's not an area that we need to create something unique. We can find partners who are already really good at that and scaling food manufacturing. And food manufacturing is also quite technical. There's all the like food safety elements, obviously. And so that a lot of meat alternative companies go and build their own food manufacturing, and there's definitely benefits to doing that. But in terms of scaling quickly, we've been able to scale much faster by outsourcing that. And to your point, the piece that we've focused on strategically is the product development. So, there aren't good mushroom meat alternatives out in the world. So that's an area where we need to build a competitive advantage. We've got the skill sets internally to do that, and hiring in some other good people to help us do that. So we sort of see our sort of strategic priorities and competitive advantage building being in the product development. Then we outsource the manufacturing, but then we also specialize in the brand building, the sales, distribution, marketing element. So it's kind of basically all we're focused on two areas here: product development, branding, marketing, sales, distribution, kind of all as one chunk.
Awesome.
And we try to outsource everything else. Yeah.
Yep. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I think, in this agri-food space, it's something where collaboration across the supply chain is, I think, one of the key critical things to success. So I think a lot of companies really struggle with that. There's a huge amount of capital, as you alluded to get things like food safety and controls and so forth put in place. So mindful of time, I'm going to throw over the questions because we've got quite a number of them that have come through. Probably to start, actually, where can people buy Fable Food?
Oh yeah, thanks. Good question. So we're in about 150 restaurants around the country. So you can go on our website and look at which restaurants that we're available in. So a couple of good ones: Ribs and Burgers. The burger chain nationally have got a sort of brisket burger based on our product on their menu. And then there's a whole bunch of independent restaurants and cafes. Then Marley Spoon, the meal kits. There's a Fable dish every second week that you can select out of Marley Spoon. And then we're in about 1,500 retail stores nationally. So our base product, the braised beef, is available in 2/3 of all the Woolworths and Coles stores around the country. So it's in the refrigerated meat alternative section, kind of where Beyond Meat is, next to the animal meat. And then we've got some Fable ready meals in Woolworths nationally. So a Fable chili con carne, a Rogan Josh, and a stroganoff.
Awesome. And yeah, I had some of it, as I said, on the weekend. It was amazing. So I highly recommend it.
No, thanks.
One of the next questions we've got is, you have raised a little bit of capital to get this to the product development cycle were you when you raised that capital? So did you have something that was ready for market, or when did you start talking to investors?
Yeah, so I started talking to investors from kind of even as I was like thinking about whether I go ahead and start Fable. And actually, to be honest, when I wanted to go into the meat alternative space, I think I was burnt out from Shoes of Prey, and I think my confidence was down because that business had sort of, we hadn't hit the goals we needed. We'd sort of failed, hadn't returned $35 million to investors. I just laid off 200 people. So I didn't want to actually didn't want to go and start another business. So I went and talked to a whole bunch of VCs to learn about how they were thinking about the meat alternative space and to ask for introductions to meat alternative companies in their portfolio. The challenge was, so Blackbird had invested in Sunfed, for example, Main Sequence Ventures had invested in V2 Foods. But the challenge was in coming back to Australia 2 years ago, those were super early stage startups, with like V2 Foods at the time was one person. Sunfed was about 5 people, other than their manufacturing team. And no one was hiring a washed up entrepreneur. So I kind of had a choice of either going, if I didn't want to start a business, I wasn't going to get a job in the meat alternative space. So I was going to have to go back and do something else that I wasn't as passionate about. And so I kind of had realized that through that process that if I wanted to start a meat alternative business, or work in that space, I'd have to actually start a business. So I was having all those conversations with VCs anyway. And yeah, Blackbird Ventures had invested in Shoes of Prey, so I had a relationship there. Mike Cannon-Brookes had invested in Shoes of Prey, so kind of knew him and Grok Ventures, his sort of VC family office now. So I was talking to them as well as a few other firms. So they were across what I was doing. And I was also keen to learn, they'd spent some time looking into the space. So I was keen to learn from them what was happening in the category. Actually, Lucy Hankin from Grok Ventures was one of the people who introduced me to my co-founders. So she was sort of across what was going on in the category. So that, having had those conversations along the way, was helpful. And then ultimately, we raised a $1.7 million seed round in October last year. At that point, we developed the product and we were just about to launch with Heston Blumenthal, the British chef. He was our first customer using the product in his restaurants in the UK. And we just received an order from Marley Spoon that was about a $100,000 order. And we needed working capital to fund the manufacturing of that order. So that's what then prompted raising that first seed round. So product ready, really one of the world's best chefs as a first customer, and then Marley Spoon with a $100,000 order as a scaled customer. That's where we'd gotten to. So yeah.
Awesome. No, I think that's excellent to be able to see that Heston was your first customer. I think there's not too many companies would be able to have that as a credibility that so early. And also amazing to see that that Blackbird came and backed you again after everything you went through with Shoes of Prey. So I think on all parties, I think it's commendable the way that you've all sort of got back together and taken another round.
Yeah, no, thanks. I'm hugely thankful to both Blackbird and Grok Ventures, because both of them were investors in Shoes of Prey, lost their money, and then there was those two that co-led our first seed round. So I think it kind of speaks to their sort of view of entrepreneurship, and I'm hugely thankful to them for backing Fable and backing me again.
Fantastic. I think got time for one more question, Danielle.
Yeah, let's wrap it up with Josh Garrett's question, and then
that's exactly where I was going to go. So Josh Garrett's asked, what's the meat industry's involvement in meat alternatives? Are they like coal power is in renewables? So up against the old industries.
Exactly. They are. They can see that this change is coming, and so they're investing in the space. And I mean, that's good. Like for us at Fable, we're as much mission driven as we are financially driven. Like obviously we want to build a successful business, but really the purpose of building a successful business is to help end industrial animal agriculture. So if the big existing players produce less animal meat and are producing more plant-based meats, that's fantastic for helping the mission. It's like a $2 trillion industry, 2.5% of global GDP. There's no way that Fable can do, any sort of big significant portion of that on our own. Like we obviously want to build a really big business and we want to have a crack at as much of that as we can. But there's no companies in the world that do $2 trillion in revenue. So there's plenty of space, and I think the category needs lots of different players and lots of competition. And then these big players are potentially, good partners. As you touched on before, in the ag food space, it's pretty crazy to try and vertically integrate as a startup. Everything from kind of growing, for us that would be growing mushrooms to developing products to making them to logistics to distribute them. Most of what we're doing, we're outsourcing. So except for those two core areas. So it's actually great that the existing meat oil companies want to enter the space because we can partner with them. So for example, our ready meals are made by a subsidiary of the world's largest meat company. JBS, or a Brazilian meat company, have a subsidiary in Sydney who do ready meals. So that's a good example of where we're kind of partnering with kind of the people in the space that we're trying to disrupt. But they're seeing this change coming, and I think it's really good for the category and opens up partnership opportunities for us.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I think I love that approach. I know that from South Australian perspective, the guys at Thomas Foods are starting to look at diversification into this space. So I think that the, you know, like energy, as Josh alluded to, you know, industries are changing and people need to sort of move to those new opportunities. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Would like to obviously thank Michael Fox this morning for joining us and having this amazing conversation. And also thank the sponsors of today's conversation, our friends at AWS. Thank you again, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining us bright and early this morning.